Hi everyone, welcome back to another Record Live. It's Thursday afternoon and we have yet another amazing, wonderful, talented special guest joining us today, Mr. Kent Kingston. How are you going?
Hey, I'm great. I'm calling you from my call center in New Delhi here with my headset. Yeah.
New Delhi, huh?
Kent.
A bit far removed from, where do you live, Koombong?
Yeah, well, on the shores of Lake Macquarie, actually. So I've got natural light from the window bathing my face, and out there is Lake Macquarie. It's beautiful.
Mm.
Nice spot. Working from home, loving it.
I mean, it does save the 1 hour trip, I think, to Wahroonga,
Each,
which
yeah,
definitely.
1:15 each way. So yes, I
Oh,
save, yeah,
wow.
2.5 hours every day.
Every day. So, for those who don't know, Jared and myself work in the same office as Kent, and he's a great guy and he does a very, very special job here. Kent, do you just want to talk about what you do at Adventist Media?
Very special.
I thought you were
Well,
going to say he was a very, very special guy, but he does a great job here.
that's right. Yeah. Well, look, from a record point of view, I'm on the record masthead. I mean, open that front cover and look down at the small print there, and you'll see my name as one of the proofreaders or sub-editors. I can't even remember what we call ourselves there, but yeah. So if you see a typo appear in record, as you're flipping through, I'm one of the people you should blame. Um,
Oh,
so hi, record readers. That's my direct connection with record. But yeah, we produce quite a few different products at Adventist Media in the editorial department. And the one I focus on in particular is Signs of the Times magazine. Here you go. I've got one right here. So that's a nice happy one. So yeah, Signs of the Times. It's been, well, I like to say, published, first published in 1886, fresher than ever. So yeah,
Fresher than ever. Is it
fresh than
true
ever.
that it's one of the longest running, continuously running sort of magazines in Australia?
In Australia, yep. It is. It's right up there. I've only found one that has a couple of years on us, and that's the Salvation Army's War Cry.
The War Cry, yeah.
Yep, yep. So there were some that started earlier in Australia, but they've
Y-
since folded.
Yeah.
But Signs of the Times is one of the only ones that has continued to this day. And look, after Bauer Media shut down 5 of their magazines, just the other week, um, it's tough for print media. So yeah,
Mm.
we're really grateful to still be chuffing along.
mm.
That's a sign of the times, all these magazines closing.
It sure is. It sure is. It's a COVID thing, I think, has been a sort of the catalyst to some of these closures. But on top of that, I mean, even before that, like Dolly closed, Ralph closed. There's been a number of sort of fairly well-known magazines that have, shut up shop or gone digital only in recent years. So yeah, it's certainly something we're aware of, being a print title.
Mm. Well, before we delve into that topic of maybe a little more later and some of the juicier stuff we're going to talk about today, Kent, this month or in 2 days' time, it's August.
Yes.
So tell us a bit about why August is significant at times.
Well, look, for many years in the Adventist Church in Australia and New Zealand and the South Pacific region, August has been dedicated to Signs Month. So I guess back in the day, it was the time when everyone's sort of subscription renewals were due. So there'd be a big drive to, hey, resubscribe, maybe bump up those numbers a bit, increase your outreach, because Signs magazine has always been an outreach magazine. It's not really aimed at people in the pews to sort of read if the sermon gets boring.
Mm.
It's not that people would read record for that reason, of course, but it's actually aimed oh, sorry, it's aimed to take home, yeah, read, enjoy, for yourself, but really its primary purpose is for you to share with your neighbor, share with your workmate,
Mm.
share with an extended family member, maybe someone who doesn't come to church anymore but used to, or maybe someone who has never darkened the door of a church. So we try really hard when we put together our articles in Signs Magazine. We have a variety of different writers. We try really hard to maintain that tone and remember that audience, that we're not talking to people who know a lot about the Bible or have a church background or necessarily have the same worldview as us. But they're open to learning, they're open to considering different faith perspectives. And so we try to be respectful, we try to be persuasive, certainly of a Christian worldview and of a biblical worldview while we do it.
And when you say it's a long time, it is a long time. I was looking for some reason through record archives the other day for one reason or another, and I think it was 50 years ago. I stumbled across perhaps the first issue of Record in August, and it had a big banner across the bottom, August is Signs Month. So
Yay!
At least for 50 years, if
That's
not
right.
longer, they've had that partnership of promoting science in
Well,
August.
that's right. Well, that's
so
right.
we're continuing a long tradition.
We certainly are continuing a long tradition. I mean, it's not the case anymore that everyone's renewals are due in August. I mean, people can subscribe any time of the year, and then that 12-month time comes up and they resubscribe. Although, to tell you the truth, what we've done now, our preferred option is just to set up an auto renewal. So every 12 months, your amount just comes out. It's sort of set and forget. That's the easiest way to do it. But even though renewals aren't all happening during August, we still think this is a great time to emphasize the mission of Signs, to ask people to consider what's your mission, what are you doing like personally, what are you doing in your church, and is it possible that Signs of the Times magazine could enhance the work that you're doing?
Just because we've only just mentioned the fact that, this has been happening for 50 years, a question I just want to insert here is, so, we live in this post-Christian, insert words here, society. It's quite a secular society. How has the mission of Signs changed? Has it become more difficult to sort of reach that demographic through this kind of like semi-Christian message recently? Or like, what does that look like?
Yeah, it's interesting you asked that, Mary Ellen, because when I first started with Signs Magazine, it was like 2 or 3 years ago now, I thought, this is going to be tough, cringe, what are people in the general public going to think about a religious magazine? Is it going to be hard to get this thing over the line? And look, there are barriers, like, for example, trying to get Signs Magazine into airports, to include it in those brochure racks that people can take. We've got them in some airports, but there's a consistent message from a lot. No, sorry, tourism information only. No, don't really accept, religious or political material. And that's their right. I totally respect that. But yeah, there certainly are some social barriers there. But what I was surprised to find was that anywhere where Signs of the Times magazine is being distributed to the public, it gets snapped up like hotcakes. So, the challenges that Signs faces in terms of, the numbers we're able to print and the numbers we're able to distribute seem to have nothing to do whatsoever with the demand that's out there from the general public. It has a lot more to do with the level of financial support and sort of, mission partnership that we have from Adventists. So yeah, that really surprised me when I discovered that. Yeah. So yeah, it can be an issue with some people, Mary Ellen, but nowhere near as much as you think. Basically, if you have it there, people will take it, people will enjoy it. They'll often come back for more.
It seems whenever we turn on the news, we're seeing signs of the times, Kent. It seems like the magazine might be, for such a time as this, it's the world's going crazy. Everyone's using words. I hear at least probably 50 times a day the word unprecedented at the moment.
Yeah.
It's been overused a little bit, so I'm not going to use it again. But, people are a bit scared, a bit anxious about what's going on in our societies, bushfires, racism, COVID-19, dare we forget that one. There's all sorts of things going on. So are we at the end of time? Are these the signs of the end? That's one thing we wanted to talk to you about today, because I think it's a question on a lot of people's minds, and not just Adventists, perhaps. What you're saying is there's still a demand in the general public for answers to these questions. So let's explore it.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been putting together some, looking at our stats, our web stats, our distribution stats, social media stats, for the, the last 12 months, the last financial year. And it's interesting to notice that two things. First of all, some of our most popular articles for that whole 12 months have been ones talking about things like dystopia, or is COVID a sign of the end, or how the world will end, all these sorts of things, which I sort of would have thought, oh, people would be a bit sort of off that sort of stuff. Oh, it's, fear mongering, it's over dramatizing, or whatever. But it seems there is an interest, there is a particular interest, because like number two is that we have seen a spike in our statistics, in that, particularly in that April, like March, April, May sort of period, that first lockdown period that we had when COVID was this new thing. People were asking questions. Yeah, we saw a spike. So it seems, yeah, people are asking questions. People do want to know. People are wondering and worried, exactly with the question you're asking, Jared. What is going on? Is this a sign of the end of the world? In answer to that, I guess my answer would be, let's wait and see. Let's keep our minds open. Let's keep our Bibles open. I mean, do you mind if I share my screen and we have a little bit of a look at what Jesus actually said about the signs of the end of the age, and how what we're
No,
experiencing goes through
I
that?
think that'd be a great idea. As you say, we got to keep our Bibles open. And if you've got, we talked a little before this, you said you had some Bible passages that we can have a look at and
Yeah,
understand this a little better. So let's do that.
Yep, I'm just, where is it? It'd probably be, this is going to look a bit messy for a little while, but if you'll
That's all right.
excuse me.
I've noticed, Kent, places like Netflix. There's a whole genre of dystopian, post-apocalyptic movies and series, and it's just sort of a genre or a niche that Netflix finds itself, doing a lot of original content in, and seems to be very popular. They don't release a lot of stats about what's the top things on Netflix all the time, but it seems there's a lot of it, so it's feeding a need, a definite.
Absolutely. And the other thing is, I think amongst like reading, young adult dystopian fiction is a particular niche that has been quite popular. Of course, we've seen a lot of movies come out, about that too. Okay, so can you see my screen now?
We can indeed. Matthew 24?
Yeah, so this is Matthew 24. This is just a classic chapter about the end of time. So what makes this chapter a little bit hard to get your head around is the context, because this is about, Jesus and the temple, and his disciples, call attention to the buildings, and he prophesies, look, I'm telling you, this temple is going to be destroyed. That's what he says. And his disciples are like, whoa, well, if the temple's going to be destroyed, when do we know that's going to be coming? And as far as they're concerned, the destruction of the temple is pretty much the same as the destruction of the end of the world, So Jesus answers their question without disentangling that misunderstanding, on what aspects of this are about the end of the world, and what aspects of this are about the end of the temple. But that some themes really emerge, and this is a really important one, and he returns to it again and again. Watch that no one deceives you. He says this over and over again, and he talks about, like further down, when he returns to it, I'm looking for it. He talks about false messiahs, and I'll probably flick past it now. False messiahs and false prophets. Yeah, go on.
Verse 24, I saw it.
Oh, you saw it there? Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so he talks about false messiahs and false prophets will appear, perform great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. See, I have told you in advance, which is good. And then goes on to say, look, there are going to be these false messiahs who say people say, look, he's out in the desert, he's in the inner room. Don't believe it. He says, when Jesus comes back, he says, it's going to be as visible as lightning from the east to the west. So that's really interesting. So he talks a bit about that, but alongside that, and it's interesting, you sort of need to really carefully to figure out if there's any sort of chronology here in terms of what's going to happen first, what's going to happen next. And I have to admit, I'm a little bit wary of that, because I think people can get too stuck up on detail and the order of things. For me, I think it's important to get the general themes right.
So treating it like a checklist rather than what you're saying is understanding the general things that are going to happen. There are some people that get out a bullet point form and tick, that one's happened, we're looking for this one next.
Yeah, they want to come up with a timeline. Yeah, they want to come up with a chronology. Screen. Yeah, bingo. Yeah. So this is interesting, because he talks about a whole bunch of different things. He says there'll be wars and there'll be rumors of wars. But then he says, but see to it, you're not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. And then he goes on talking more about wars there. Then he talks about some more sort of natural signs. He talks about famines and earthquakes in various places. And in the King James Version, and also in the sort of parallel passage in the Gospel of Luke, in Luke 21, the word pestilence actually appears alongside famines and earthquakes here.
Right.
So a pestilence or a plague, we're talking about a sickness or a plague, I guess, of locusts or of whatever. COVID-19 fits into that category.
We've certainly seen a lot of people commenting around at this time, or writing articles for Record as well, about linking some of that idea of pestilences and COVID-19 directly together, and asking questions about the end of the world.
Yep. So, but notice that what Jesus says about these things are bookended by his comments. Before, he says, see to it that you're not alarmed, such things must happen. And afterwards, he says, all these are the beginning of birth pains. So he's warning us, these things will happen, but don't get too panicky, like this isn't it quite yet. This is sort of the beginning of the time of the end, rather than the end, if you know what I mean. He talks about being persecuted, being put to death, being hated by all nations. It's not pretty. But we also see some things here that we might be able to relate to. It says, for example, because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold. And we certainly see, particularly in the Western countries, when it comes to, Christianity, there are a lot of people falling away from Christianity. So those are some of the sort of the key signs there. And COVID does fit into that, but it doesn't fit into it in the sense that, oh heck, this is it, like, Jesus is probably coming back next week.
Right at the end of it.
Yeah, that's right. So it tells us, hey, this fits. But look, then again, I have to admit, I'm aware that even though people use the word unprecedented, as you say, Jared, this is not unprecedented. I mean, when you look at the Black Plague of medieval times, or when you look just 100 years ago at the Spanish flu, I mean, there were possibly hundreds of millions of people who died at that time of the Spanish flu. Then they had the First World War just before it. They had the Great Depression just after it. They had the Second World War just after that. Then they had the first nuclear bomb dropped in anger. I mean, heck, the people who were living in the first half of the 20th century, in some ways had a lot tougher than us. And it's probably not surprising that it was at that time that, the 1940s and 1950s, when the Seventh-day Adventist Church had its biggest boom in membership growth. And that is, certainly the sort of time when Signs of the Times magazine was like, right at its zenith of popularity. Because when a series of these things happen like this, it makes people ask questions. It makes people wonder.
Sorry,
go ahead.
Here's a curly question. Just as you're saying that, it's got me thinking, should we then be looking to, how should we treat these opportunities? Is it an opportunity to say, well, people are anxious, people are fearful, we have hope. are we exploiting disastrous situations to perhaps see another boom period of growth in the church? Should we be using this opportunity to reach? I'm not sure how that sits with me. In one sense, as a dyed in the wool Adventist boy, it's like, yeah, well, that makes sense. You know, people need Jesus, and if they're not going to turn to him in good times, then perhaps when things are going tough, that's the best time. But then on the flip side of that, it's like, should we use these terrible events to try and boost our numbers, or I don't know, manipulate people's emotions and anxieties
cynical,
to get them in? And you know, I think that leads us to sort of part of our topic today that we wanted to cover in terms of evangelism, what that might look like, and how to do that, I guess, in a modern and relevant way for the current society that we live in.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, I guess, to return to what Jesus says there, often what we do is that we read Matthew 24, we figure out our chronology, we sort out our timeline, and then we toddle off to, with a sense of certainty, oh, good, I know all about the end of time. But if we are actually to continue reading, because Matthew 24 is only the first part of what Jesus says to his disciples, he continues.
Right.
He talks about the fact that we need to watch and pray. We need to be ready. He gives that parable of those 10 bridesmaids, waiting for the wedding.
Yes.
Tells us that we need to be ready. But then he finishes off the very final story is Jesus. Then he talks about the talents, actually, the parable of the talents, those 3 servants who were each given a different number of talents to look after while the master was away on a long journey. And interestingly enough, a lot of these stories have a delay built into them. And the question is, okay, so you've been given certain gifts while you're waiting for the master to return. What are you doing with them in the meantime? So in that sense, it's not enough just to have your chronology and your prophecy correct. What Jesus wants to know is, what are we doing with what God has given us in this time of waiting, in this time of delay, in this time of wondering what's next? And then he gets even more specific, because the final parable that Jesus gives in that talk is the parable of the sheep and the goats. And here he just breaks it down real simple. There's, all these people who are maybe consider themselves, religious or whatever. But he says, look, what matters in the end is when you saw someone in need, when you saw someone hungry or thirsty or in need of clothes, or there was someone in hospital or prison who needed a visit, where were you? Because that Jesus seems to say, that's what happens in the end. You say you love me, you say you follow me, but I'm there in the person of the poor. I'm there in the person of the prisoner and the vulnerable. How, were you reaching out? So Jesus is pretty specific about the sorts of things we should be doing while we wait.
And that's in chapter 25, isn't it, Kent? Those 3 stories that you mentioned. So we tend to read it in our Western sort of segmented mind as a separate section of the Bible. We push it away and separate it. But if you do read just before and just after those bits and pieces, even the first verse of chapter 26 says, when Jesus had finished saying all these things. So it's suggesting that all that stuff that comes before is one sort of discourse, one sermon, or one presentation, one message to his followers. And as you say, it's almost like he flicks from he changes their question to then talk about specifically. It seems what's important to him is our actions in the time. Rather than what's happening in the time itself.
Yeah, that's right. Not that he doesn't answer the question. He does give signs of the times.
Yes,
absolutely, and that's important. Then he says, "Be ready. Don't be deceived. Look out for this stuff." But then it's more than just, waiting and watching. In a safe, sort of place.
In an underground bunker.
That's right. Yeah,
with nut meat.
Yeah, it's not about bunker. It's about get out there and and help those people who need help, even if in some ways we're asleep, like all 10 of those bridesmaids were. All
right.
10.
Taking that into account then, right, we've talked about Signs of the Times magazine and how people are thirsty for knowledge and truth, but it seems that Jesus is more focused on our practical actions, as you say, helping people in prison, helping them in hospital. So is there like, do we overstate the role perhaps of sort of not fear mongering necessarily, but like providing information? Is that all sort of not as valuable as maybe what we think it is?
I think we need to keep it in balance. It's a question of getting the balance right. And sometimes I think as Adventists, we do tend towards the theoretical and the intellectual and the sort of prophetic and forget the practical. I mean, I read something earlier this week that just sort of blew my mind. There was in Adventist Today, I think, uh, an Adventist college lecturer in the US said he attended a meeting where there are a number of other academics from other Christian institutions of different denominations, and they're chatting. And this other academic asks the Adventist guy, "Oh, so what do you teach?" He says, "Well, I teach a bit of New Testament, and also I've been doing some postgraduate classes on the sanctuary." And the guy goes, "Oh, that's great. So how many refugees did you take into your church?"
Oh.
What? Because to this other Christian, the word sanctuary conjured
Yes.
up this sanctuary movement in the US that involves taking undocumented migrants into your church building, looking after them there, caring for them, because legally in a lot of states, or at least morally, and it's not good optics, the police or the authorities can't go in there and arrest people in a church and then like drag them off to be deported. So a number of churches are a part of this sanctuary movement in the US. But this disconnect between, what the word sanctuary means to one lot of Christians versus another lot of Christians, I think is really, really revealing in terms of what our priorities are. And it really saddens me sometimes. I almost get a sense that there are some Adventists when, there's an earthquake that, kills 1,000 people, and some Adventists will almost rub their hands with glee and say, "Oh, Jesus is coming soon." You know, I really struggle with that.
I should just interject here at this point and just remind our viewers they can let us know where they're watching from and ask any questions. If you have any questions for Kent or for any of us about the signs of the times, or perhaps the Bible text that we're looking at, we're not going to promise to have all the answers, but we'll certainly have a go at asking your questions and addressing those. So,
yeah. You mentioned, Kent, there's kind of like a disconnect between sometimes the Adventist church and sort of this theoretical basis for what we believe and the rest of Christendom, or just the general public. How do you balance that?
Go on. I think other Christians probably have similar problems too. It's easy to self-flagellate, really.
Yes.
Yeah, but sorry, go on.
Yeah, so in your work at the magazine, you're trying to have this magazine that's not jargony toward Adventists, and yet Adventists support the magazine financially, I imagine. What is that? Is there a tension there? Is that a difficult thing to balance sometimes?
That's a pretty central dilemma to what we do at Signs of the Times, because you're totally right, Mary Ellen. Our supporters and our donors, are our bread and butter. They're totally who we depend on. A lot of those are older Adventists, retired Adventists. A number of those are probably, relatively conservative. And, I had an email the other day from someone who disagreed with something that had appeared in the magazine. And he said, this shouldn't appear in our magazine. And that to me revealed this real sense of ownership and this sense of connection with Signs of the Times magazine. It's our magazine. It belongs to us, which is really beautiful in one way. Like that sense, it's not something that, these jokers over at the SPD office are putting together. This is something that is our magazine. That's beautiful. But the flip side of that is, exactly what you're saying, Mary Ellen, that sometimes it's difficult to explain to Adventists that, hey, if you read what's in here and you think, this doesn't sound very Adventist, this doesn't sound like what I'm used to, like, where's the depth, where's the meat? Well, the reason is because it's not actually designed for you to read. It's designed for your workmate, for your neighbor, for your, your extended family member who doesn't attend church. So therefore we have to pitch those articles to them. We have to grab onto those current issues that are happening in the world around us and try to link those with spiritual sort of concepts and ideas in a way that's going to make sense to a person on the street. So what we'll often find is a lot of writers get excited about Science Magazine. They'll send us in articles that are basically devotionals, and a devotional is a wonderful thing to read if you're an established Christian and you need that sort of daily nurture and to build up your spirituality. But it's a completely foreign genre to a person on the street. So I end up knocking back
Kent
a
sends it to
lot of
us.
devotion. Yeah, so I send it to Jared. Say, hey,
Sends it
Jared,
to record the discard
here's a
file.
devotional. You might like
guys.
this. That's right. And it can be really hard to try to train writers not to say, we all know the story of the woman in the well, because we don't all know the story of the woman at the well. You got to actually tell the story and explain it properly, or think of another way to say what you're going to say. And it's funny, some of our writers, when I start saying this to them, they say, oh, so you don't want me to put any Bible texts in there? Don't want me to mention God? I'm like, no, that's not what I mean at all. I want you to mention God, and I want you to mention him explicitly and persuasively, but I want you to do it in the language of the street, not the language of the Sabbath school class or of, an Ellen White book.
I see some comments here, Kent.
Yeah.
Lee Boy from Papua New Guinea,
one of our Tobias, hey, one talk blummy.
One of our regular viewers, he says it's time for Signs of the Times magazine to shine its light forth, and also Adventist Record, glad and blessed for their work. So he's just appreciating
that's fantastic,
the content that we're doing. And
can I say something to Lee Boy? Lee Boy, you need to look out, my friend, because there is a special Pacific edition of Science Magazine that has been delivered to PNG earlier this year. It should be beginning to be distributed around all the different mission offices. Try to get your hands on a batch if you have an outreach ministry. You should be able to access it for free and share it for free. It's a really special project that we're doing, and we would love your support, everyone's support for that Pacific Science Magazine. We'd love to print one next year as well.
Yeah, Lee Boy's a minister, I think, in the CPC conference, and
that's
so
right.
I'm sure his church members will be able to distribute some of those if they can grab some of them. Di has written in. She's at the Riverside Convention Center Church Campground Managers in Townsville. I know a lot of the campgrounds actually distribute signs as a ministry when they have people coming into their spaces. She said, regarding the practical aspect that we were talking about earlier, I had a couple come into the campground this week stating that they chose us over other camping venues because of our hospital and our aged care work.
Wow.
They said what you people are doing. They like what you people are doing. So yeah, it's good to see that our witness is practical in many senses in the world, and that people can appreciate
absolutely.
that.
Yeah. No, thanks for that comment, Di, and g'day. Good to talk to you. And I know, like, there are people who I'm thinking of what I've heard from the Stewart's Point Convention Centre in North New South Wales.
Yes.
They say that they too have a number of people who just from the general community who come and camp there, and they've said a number of times to the coordinators, the caretakers there, there's something about this campground. There's a spirit here, this positive warmth, this sense of safety and calm and peace that's here that we don't find anywhere else. We love this place, and certainly those campgrounds are one place where we love to get Signs of the Times in there, and I believe Di and the Stewart's Point, both of those locations are places where Signs Magazine is shared or is available for campers to take, in the front office or whatever. Some of them put one in every sort of room if they have cabins and things like that, so people who come along can grab them. That's a part of our Community Connections project, which is a new thing we've kicked off. It's actually undersubscribed at the minute. So yeah, we're definitely looking for donations to support those kind of projects. Yeah.
I was staying at Jindabyne recently, and they have a magazine in each cabin that you can flick through there, a science magazine.
Yep, Adventist Alpine Village. Yeah, they're big supporters. Yeah, they have been for a while.
So that's great. Going into what you were saying just before, what does it mean, I guess, what have you learnt, I suppose, about some of the things you've been talking about in terms of evangelism to the modern world that we can take? Perhaps we don't, of course, we'd love if people wanted to subscribe to Signs or to support some of those projects that they're doing, but perhaps they don't have a job at the moment because of COVID, or they don't have capacity to support or to donate. What are some things you've learnt in trying to communicate the Adventist message to the general public that we could take into our personal ministry lives, like into our personal spheres of influence and our relationships in as Christians, as Adventist Christians.
Look, a couple of things. Something that comes to mind, immediately is hearing some of those stories from people who, who come to faith in the end, and they say, Signs magazine was a part of my journey. But it's not the case often that, someone is an atheist one day, they pick up a Signs magazine and read it and say, my goodness, where's a baptismal font? I'm ready to go. It doesn't happen like that. They may, I've heard a couple of stories where a catalyst to someone beginning their journey was a Signs magazine, or perhaps as they journeyed along, someone shared a Signs magazine with them, and that sort of built their faith and got them asking other questions. But generally, what seems to be the case is that it's just those genuine, friendly, like, encounters and those relationships that are being built with a person of faith that over a period of months or even years that actually, make the difference. A resource like Signs magazine may have a part to play in that process, and that's fantastic. But it just seems to be, often a number of different factors. It might be a public meeting, it might be something you read, but often it's the friendship that is the core of what's going on there, and helps sort of people slowly, open their hearts and slowly come to new realizations. So that's probably the number one thing I'd say. Don't expect to hand a Signs magazine over the fence and for someone to fall into the font. It will very likely not happen like that. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. And it's funny how often the case is that someone will say, I finally came to faith, and they tell the story of how it happened, and it involves people who are now passed away or who live interstate and probably have no idea how it happened. So you just never know, the impact that you will have on someone as you share with them. That's number one. And I guess the other thing that I guess I could draw out of Signs magazine for that sort of personal witness is, what we try to do in the magazine is to think, what questions are people asking out there? What struggles are they having, and how can we address those? I think it's always good to start by listening, to start by being other-centered rather than self-centered. That's been a mistake sometimes in the past. We have our agenda, we have our list of topics we want to get through. But I think it's important to start with where people are at. I know I've made mistakes in the past where someone has approached me. I remember once I was at a stall at an agricultural show, and someone came to me and said, "Oh yeah, I'm a neo-pagan and into Wicca and all this sort of stuff, and I worship the earth." And I just came back with a snappy comeback. I worship the creator of the earth. and which was very clever of me, but that was the end of the conversation. If I had responded with wow, I don't think I've ever met someone like who believes like you do, like, tell me more about it, how did you come to that place, we may have actually had a conversation. You know what I mean? And it's really easy sometimes just to come back with the opposition of, well, I believe the truth, and that is actually a way to shut down a conversation sometimes rather than opening one up. So I'd say, listen, ask questions, show genuine interest in people rather than just seeing them as a foil for your witnessing.
See, on that point, I think a lot of Adventists that I have met in the past would probably say that, not Signs of the Times specifically, but, some of the stuff you do, some of the stuff that different Christian publications do is watered down. It's not actually actively preaching the gospel. As you say, it's not coming back at someone immediately and being like, this is what's true. Is there a place for that? Is there a place for coming back at people? Or do you think, just given your experience in this role, that it's just never going to be successful?
I think that totally is a place for being clear and for even rebuking. But that place is from a place of trust and love, once you've built a relationship with someone to the point where they could say it to you too. And you would take it and you would understand the genuine place that it comes from. So yeah, sometimes we have to say hard things. And look, I suppose, we shouldn't limit the way that God chooses to to use people. There are some really hard-hitting sort of preachers and stuff out there, and they have a massive online audience. They have a lot of people who are really interested in what they have to say. They're not just fellow Christians necessarily. There are some people out there who love to hear someone who just puts it down straight. They really get into that. They learn a lot. They're challenged, they're confronted, and they don't mind. But for most people, I think, especially in a one-on-one sort of encounter, rather than at a distance from a YouTube screen where you can be like, whoa, this is cool. Yeah, I think a gentler approach and a listening approach and an other-centered approach is generally, probably should be the way to go.
I guess the number one rule of effective communication is knowing your audience, right?
Totally, but you got to get to know your audience first before you know your audience, which means you got to care who they are, not just what you've got to say.
Yeah. Well, it's been great to get some good insights, Kent. Jared, do you have any more questions for Kent, or maybe we can get a take home?
Yeah, I think we're running out of time. That seemed to fly by. Are we running out of time?
Oh, I was expecting to go the whole hour. You don't
I was
go a
just
whole
going to say, by the time we finish, it'll probably be close. I'm not sure we're quite finished yet.
Yeah.
I guess I was just reflecting on the fact that what I'm seeing in the world around me, and I chatted with some of my boys in my small group, some of the guys that I worship with and do life with, and think about some of these things with. Just on, I guess, the polarization of the world and some of the echo chambers that we find ourselves in. And you're right, there might be some fairly strident preachers online and some very people who seem to get good results. They seem to have heaps of views, heaps of hits, lots of popularity. But I wonder if the voices that are supporting and following some of those people are just the people that agree with them, and they're glad to see someone preaching their particular brand of stridency, if that's even a word.
Sure.
I wonder if, what you're saying isn't in this sort of it's almost a post-truth world, with all the fake news stuff and people seeming to believe more what's politically expedient rather than what's really true. It does seem that what you're suggesting, relationships as the core of behavioral change in the end, is a really key thing that perhaps we utilize or don't think enough about as a church or as individuals.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think we need to work on it as individuals, in terms of, why don't I know my neighbors? We have some cultural barriers, because if the way to make friends is to let's come down the pub and have a drink on Friday night, well, then that's just like 3 strikes, straight off for a lot of Adventists. I don't go to the pub, I don't drink, and not on Friday night, thanks. So, there are a lot of cultural barriers, because of our particular way of being. I think we are the ones who have to compensate for that. We can't expect others to. If we genuinely, do care about other people and want to reach them for Jesus, we need to find ways to, get around those barriers and connect with people. Relationships are totally, really, really important. And then as churches, as congregations, we also need to make ourselves a little more friendly, and which is not to say, could all you're a visitor, please stand up, which has been done in a number of churches. Calling people out like that is actually not a comfortable thing, but there are ways to make people feel welcome. That quiet person who just sits down the back, who you haven't seen before, they're the person who just needs a quiet, friendly approach, and hey, haven't seen you here before, and just to befriend and to care and to meet needs, for the least of these in particular, as Jesus said.
Well, something I really love about Science Magazine is that so many of your articles, like I often get a copy when you're handing them around the office and things like that. Thank you very much. Like a lot of them are very practically focused, and I've noticed, maybe it's just I'm noticing this, but you've had a few different articles recently sort of on the topic of like loneliness and like, relationships and communication. And I think when you sort of put the gospel into that context, it becomes just so different to what it's like in our churches. So that's just kind of a guess, a compliment to your curating skills. But
yeah, that loneliness I think, didn't you write that loneliness article, Jared?
no,
It was actually one of our most popular. So
okay, maybe
yeah.
I did, but
did very well. Yeah. Yeah. Look, there are needs out there. People are struggling. People are asking questions. An article will help and guide on their way, but what they really need is human contact, I think. That's what it comes down to.
Which is a challenge in coronavirus lockdown, and I guess just reflecting on the signs of the end that we have around us, there are going to be challenges like that to relationship. And I guess what you're saying is we need to find creative ways to still keep connected with the people around us and still be I guess a beacon of friendliness and hope and help.
Yeah.
Potentially there's a lot of people going through a lot of difficulties financially or putting food on the table for their children. So I've seen a lot of churches get involved in food parcel ministries or even drive-through food parcel. Like I think, Kent, you wrote an article for us about the Bonnells Bay crew who are doing
just around the corner
drive-through
from here. Yeah.
A drive-through food bank. So like there are ways to continue to connect with our community, even as the world seems to be on fire around us.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I actually had a call this week from someone from that particular food pantry who said, "Hey, people are just sitting in their cars while they're waiting for their food parcel. Could we sort out, getting some science magazines there to, to offer to people something to read while they're waiting?" And I was like, "Oh, you have got it. That is exactly where we want Science Magazine to be, where the church is making a positive impact, where relationships are being built. That is the perfect place, for science."
So
do you have anything? Oh, sorry.
I was going to ask if people want to support science, if the science is August is Science Month.
Yep.
How do they practically do that?
Okay. And as Jared was about to say, is there anything you wanted to say? Well, and my answer is yes to both. Can I share my screen again?
Yeah, sure.
All right, here we go. You'll see Matthew there for a minute, but then I've actually got our website here. So here's our Signs of the Times website. That might be too small, but signsofthetimes.org.au, or if you're in New
very
Zealand,
fresh.
Yep, signsofthetimes.org.nz. We like to keep up with the times. Check this out. Woo! Scary bat.
7 deadly viruses.
Scary bat.
That's a good article.
Yeah. So this is actually our podcast, so you can check that out. Looking at the Papuan crisis, vaping, 7 deadly viruses, which is, the article looking at pandemics and stuff. So there's health stuff there. There's current issue stuff there. But if you want to, obviously you can read a lot of the articles online. We'd love you to, to read an article and then share it with someone on Facebook or social media. That's fantastic. But up here in the top corner here, of course, we have our subscribe button, so you can get it for yourself, and also, organize to get more and share with other people. If you go to our donate page, there's a whole bunch of different projects that you can support here. Here's the community connection one that I was talking about. But airports obviously are a little quiet at the moment. So that one's probably not where your money needs to go right now. But certainly there's a number of projects there. New Zealand evangelism too, that really needs help. So particularly if you're passionate about New Zealand, would love to get some donations there. I
saw some New Zealanders watching us, Kent. So they're
excellent.
They're out there.
Excellent. So so there's that's signsofthetimes.org.au. And check the website out. Read, enjoy, subscribe, donate.
Very cool. We had another comment come in from Gabriel Ontanu. He says, knocking at the door of my neighbor is still the simplest and the best way to reach out with hope. And he followed that conversation by saying he met 5 new neighbors since moving into a new neighborhood in April. So he's having
that'd be Gabriel. Yep.
Some success, some good success in just being friendly and, as you say, meeting his neighbors.
Yeah,
so.
He's a very friendly, outgoing guy, and I can totally see that happening. Difficult not to respond to him with a smile, but I think even quieter people, are able to do this too. You know, there's often, if you're a quiet person, you'll notice other quiet people, and it just
Mm.
needs to be a quiet, you know, one-on-one, not to overwhelm them, you know, but just to just to connect one-on-one in that way that introverts do. You know, I think that's fantastic. So good on
Yeah.
you, Gabriel. Love it. Take a Signs magazine over next time.
Great advice for Signs Month, Kent. Hey, thanks for joining us, Kent. I don't know if Mary Ellen's got anything else.
No, just
Ed, I think we've had some good conversation. We've had some good
absolutely.
comments come in, and we appreciate you for watching, and for you, Kent, for joining us, taking the time today.
Oh, it's been absolutely fantastic. Thanks so much for the opportunity. Really appreciate it. And yeah, looking forward to a whole month of Signs emphasis.
Woohoo. Check out Adventist Record this weekend for Kent's special editorial on the topic. So, all right, we'll see you guys next week. Bye.
Thanks very much.
See you later.